Are you ready to witness a vice president's political suicide live on air? Because the documents in Jasmine Crockett's hands weren't just going to shake JD Vance, they were about to bring down an entire system. And this was just the beginning. At exactly 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time, as cameras rolled across CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked into the House Veterans Affairs Committee hearing chamber carrying something that would change American politics forever. Not files, not folders, not the typical political theater props. She carried 12 folded American flags, each one representing a dead veteran, and a single scorched envelope marked, "Classified, do not open." The room fell silent before she even reached her seat. JD Vance sat across from her, flanked by his security detail and communication team. As vice president, he rarely appeared before congressional committees, but this hearing was different. This was about Operation Triage Red, a classified veterans care protocol that had somehow leaked to the press 3 weeks earlier. Initial reports suggested budget reallocations, cost-cutting measures, standard Washington bureaucracy. They had no idea what was really coming. Jasmine didn't smile, didn't nod at colleagues, didn't engage in the usual pre-hearing pleasantries. She methodically placed each folded flag on the desk before her microphone. One by one, 12 flags, 12 lives. By the time the last flag touched the mahogany surface, every eye in the chamber was locked on her. The committee chairman, Representative Bradley Morrison from Ohio, cleared his throat nervously. The committee will come to order. Today we're examining allegations regarding veterans care protocols and, Mr. Chairman, Jasmine's voice cut through the formal proceedings like a blade. Before we begin, I need to present evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of this hearing. Morrison hesitated. This wasn't on the agenda. Congresswoman Crockett, if you have materials to submit, they should have been provided to... Sir, with respect, some evidence can't wait for procedural courtesy. Jasmine lifted the scorched envelope. Especially when American heroes are dying because of it. The cameras zoomed in. C-SPAN's director, watching from the control room, had been broadcasting congressional hearings for 30 years. He'd never seen anything like this. "Keep all cameras rolling," he whispered into his headset. "Everything." JD Vance shifted in his chair. His communications director, Sarah Chen, leaned forward to whisper something, but Vance waved her off. His eyes were locked on that envelope. Something about it seemed familiar. "Congresswoman," Vance's voice carried that practiced political tone, confident, dismissive, designed to establish control. "While I appreciate your theatrical presentation, perhaps we could focus on the actual issues rather than whatever performance you've prepared." That was his first mistake. Jasmine looked directly at him, not through him, not past him, into him. "Mr. Vice President, I want to thank you for being here today, because what I'm about to present requires your personal response." She opened the envelope with the deliberate care of a surgeon, making the first incision. Inside were 3 items: a scorched military dog tag, a printed email thread, and an audio file on a secured USB drive. These belonged to Private First Class Marcus King, 82nd Airborne Division, 2 tours in Afghanistan, Purple Heart recipient, 24 years old when he returned home to Detroit with severe PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and what doctors called invisible wounds of war. Jasmine held up the dog tag. The metal was blackened, edges curled from heat, but the name was still visible. King Marcus J. Marcus applied for emergency mental health services through the VA on January 15, 2024. His application was processed through something called Operation Triage Red, a protocol that categorizes veterans into priority groups for care allocation. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Marcus was classified as Category B, non-essential, low priority. His care was delayed indefinitely. The room was dead silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers had stopped. On March 3, 2024, Marcus King was found dead in his apartment, suicide. This dog tag was recovered from the scene. She placed it carefully on the desk. He died wearing his uniform because, according to his sister, he didn't know how to be anything else. Representative Morrison cleared his throat. Congresswoman, while tragic individual cases, this isn't an individual case. Jasmine's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. This is systematic neglect masquerading as policy. She lifted the printed emails. These are internal communications from the Department of Veterans Affairs, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. They detail the implementation of Operation Triage Red, including specific criteria for veteran categorization. Her eyes found Vance again. Would you like me to read the classification guidelines, Mr. Vice President, or would you prefer to explain them yourself? Vance's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Congresswoman, I'm not sure what conspiracy theory you're attempting to construct, but Category A veterans, Jasmine continued, ignoring his interruption, receive immediate care. These include veterans with visible physical injuries, high-profile service records, or what the documents call positive optics value. She turned the page deliberately. Category B veterans are subject to delayed care pending resource availability. This category specifically includes veterans with mental health issues, PTSD, substance abuse problems, and, I quote directly, veterans whose conditions may present ongoing financial burden without clear resolution timeline. The implications hung in the air like smoke. But there's a third category, isn't there, Mr. Vice President? Vance's communications director was frantically typing on her phone. His security chief had moved closer to the table, but Vance himself sat perfectly still, his political instincts warring with growing panic. Category C, Jasmine continued, priority denial, reserved for cases deemed non-beneficial to department objectives or presenting administrative complexity without compensatory value. She looked up from the documents. Do you know what administrative complexity means in this context, Mr. Vice President? Silence. It means veterans who might ask too many questions, veterans who might demand accountability, veterans who might not quietly accept substandard care. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Veterans who look like me. The accusation hit the chamber like a physical blow. Cameras captured every face, every reaction, every moment of stunned recognition. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Over the past 18 months, Operation Triage Red has processed 47,000 veteran applications for emergency care. 31% were classified as Category B. 8% were classified as Category C. She paused. Of the Category C veterans, 73% were Black or Latino. Of those denied care entirely, 89% were minorities. The statistics weren't just numbers, they were an indictment. Mr. Vice President, as the official who signed the Operation Triage Red implementation order, how do you explain these disparities? For the first time since entering politics, JD Vance seemed genuinely speechless. His media training had prepared him for policy disputes, partisan attacks, even personal scandals. But this was something else entirely. This was data, facts, an undeniable pattern of systematic discrimination. Congresswoman, he finally managed, you're mischaracterizing a complex resource allocation system. Am I? Jasmine reached for the USB drive. Because I have something that might clarify the complexity. She inserted the drive into her laptop, and the committee room's audio system crackled to life. The voice that emerged was unmistakably JD Vance's, recorded at what sounded like a private dinner or fundraising event. The audio quality was clear, the words devastating. Look, we have to be realistic about veteran care priorities. Not every sob story deserves the same resources. Black vets, in particular, tend to have more complex needs, behavioral issues, family problems, underlying social complications. From a pure cost-benefit analysis, they're not always the best investment. Laughter could be heard in the background. Vance's voice continued. Operation Triage Red gives us the tools to direct resources where they'll have the most impact. And frankly, where they'll generate the best optics for the administration. Nobody votes based on helping some PTSD case from Detroit. But a wounded warrior with a compelling story? That's political gold. The playback stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Jasmine let the words hang in the air for a full 30 seconds before speaking. This recording was made at a private donor dinner 9 months ago. It has been authenticated by 3 independent forensic audio specialists. She turned to face Vance directly. Mr. Vice President, do you dispute the authenticity of your own voice? Vance's face had gone completely pale. His communications director was no longer typing. She was staring at her phone screen in apparent horror. His security chief had positioned himself between Vance and the cameras, but there was no hiding from this. That recording is taken out of context, Vance stammered. Private conversations don't reflect official policy. Don't they? Jasmine's voice remained steady, controlled. Because the data suggests otherwise. She pulled out another document. This is the internal VA memo implementing Operation Triage Red, dated 6 weeks after your recorded comments. It specifically references optimizing resource allocation based on strategic value assessments and minimizing administrative burden from complex cases. She looked up. Your signature is at the bottom. The committee chairman was frantically consulting with staff, clearly lost in unprecedented territory. Opposition members were scribbling notes furiously, but everyone's attention remained locked on the confrontation unfolding before them. Mr. Vice President, Jasmine continued, I want to read you something else. This is a voicemail left by Marcus King 3 days before his death. She pressed play again. This time, the voice was different, younger, broken, desperate. Hi, this is Marcus King, service number 472859-341. I've been calling for 2 months about my mental health evaluation. The VA said I'm not priority level for immediate care. I served 2 tours. I bled for this country. I still wear my uniform on Sundays because I don't know how to be anything else. The voice cracked with emotion. I'm not asking for special treatment. I just need help. Please, if anyone gets this message, I just need someone to call me back. The message ended with Marcus leaving his phone number, his voice barely above a whisper. He called 17 times, Jasmine said quietly. 17 voicemails, each one a little more desperate, each one unanswered. She turned back to Vance. On the 18th call, 3 days before his death, Marcus spoke to a VA administrator. Do you know what he was told? Vance couldn't speak. He was told that his case had been reviewed and classified as non-priority due to administrative complexity and uncertain treatment outcomes. He was advised to seek private care if his condition was urgent. Jasmine's voice hardened. Private care he couldn't afford with a service-connected disability rating that your department had denied 3 times. The weight of the accusation settled over the chamber like a physical presence. This wasn't just about policy failures or bureaucratic inefficiency. This was about abandoning the people who had sacrificed everything for their country. But Jasmine still wasn't finished. I have 11 more names, she said, gesturing to the remaining flags on her desk. 11 more veterans who died waiting for care that was delayed or denied under Operation Triage Red. Would you like me to read them all? She didn't wait for an answer. Sergeant Luis Tavares, Purple Heart recipient, classified Category C, died in a VA parking lot after being turned away as non-emergency. Specialist Renee Walker, 3 tours in Iraq, classified Category B for postpartum PTSD, found dead in her garage. Her infant daughter survived. Each name was a blow, each story a devastating indictment. Corporal David Washington, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, Private Tom Blackhorse, all Category B or C classifications, all dead within 6 months of seeking care, all veterans who served this country with honor and were abandoned by the system they trusted to help them heal. Jasmine's voice never wavered, never rose, never broke, but the accumulation of names, stories, and evidence was crushing the room under its weight. Mr. Vice President, she said finally, these weren't administrative errors. They weren't resource constraints. They weren't bureaucratic failures. This was policy, your policy, signed by you, implemented under your authority, and defended even now in your silence. Vance's hands were trembling. His political instincts, honed over years of campaigns and controversy, had completely failed him. There was no spin for this, no talking points, no way to reframe systematic discrimination as anything other than what it was. He started, then stopped, started again. The complexities of veteran care administration require difficult decisions. No. Jasmine's interruption was quiet but absolute. The complexities of veteran care require compassion. They require honor. They require keeping faith with the people who kept faith with America. She stood slowly, each movement deliberate and controlled. Mr. Vice President, you said that nobody votes based on helping some PTSD case from Detroit. But Marcus King wasn't a case. He was a hero. They all were heroes, and you reduced them to line items in a budget calculation. Jasmine picked up the scorched dog tag again, holding it so the cameras could see clearly. This represents more than a failed policy. It represents a fundamental betrayal of American values. When we send our young people to war, we make a sacred promise. If you come home broken, we will help you heal. If you come home wounded, we will care for you. If you sacrifice for us, we will never abandon you. Her eyes found Vance one final time. You broke that promise, not once, not accidentally, systematically, deliberately, with full knowledge of the consequences. She placed the dog tag gently on the desk next to the folded flags. Marcus King died wearing his uniform because he didn't know how to be anything else, but he died believing his country had forgotten him. Because of you, Mr. Vice President. Because of your signature on documents that treated heroes like problems to be managed rather than people to be honored. The chamber was completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to have stopped moving. I have one final piece of evidence, Jasmine said, reaching into her folder. This is a memo classified secret dated last month. It recommends expanding Operation Triage Red to include all VA mental health services nationwide. She held up the document. Your signature is on this one too. The implications were staggering. What had been a limited program was being prepared for national implementation. Thousands more veterans would face the same categorization system that had failed Marcus King and 11 others. Mr. Vice President, Jasmine said, given everything we've discussed today, do you still believe Operation Triage Red represents sound policy for caring for America's veterans? For a long moment, JD Vance said nothing. His political career, his carefully cultivated image, his future ambitions, everything hung in the balance of his next words. Finally he spoke, but his voice was barely audible. The program will be reviewed. It wasn't an admission. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't nearly enough. Jasmine nodded slowly. Mr. Vice President, review isn't sufficient. These veterans can't wait for another committee to study whether their lives have value. They can't wait for another review to determine if their service matters. She gathered the flags from her desk, holding them carefully. I'm introducing legislation tomorrow to immediately suspend Operation Triage Red and establish an independent commission to investigate every denied claim, every delayed treatment, every veteran who died waiting for help. She looked directly into the primary camera. And to the veterans watching this, you are not forgotten. Your service matters. Your wounds matter. Your lives matter. And we will not stop fighting until the system honors the sacrifice you made for all of us. As Jasmine walked toward the chamber exit, something unprecedented happened. The veterans in the gallery, there for the hearing as observers, began to stand, not in applause, in solidarity. A quiet recognition that someone had finally spoken for them. JD Vance remained seated, surrounded by his staff, facing questions he couldn't answer about a policy he could no longer defend. Within hours, the footage would be viral across every social media platform. Justice for Marcus would trend worldwide. Veterans organizations would demand immediate action. Editorial boards would call for investigations. But the real impact wasn't in the trending hashtags or news coverage. It was in the VA offices across the country, where administrators quietly began reviewing Category B and C classifications. It was in the homes of families who had lost veterans to bureaucratic neglect, finally seeing their loved ones' stories heard. And it was in the office of JD Vance, where his staff informed him that 17 Republican senators had already called to distance themselves from Operation Triage Red. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett stood in her office, looking at the folded flag on her desk, the one she had saved for last. This one represented all the veterans still fighting for care, still waiting for the system to remember its promises. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, but she declined them all. This wasn't about political theater or personal gain. This was about justice. And justice, she knew, required more than viral moments. It required lasting change. 3 days later, Operation Triage Red was suspended pending a full Justice Department investigation. JD Vance announced he would not seek re-election as vice president. The independent commission was established with bipartisan support. But perhaps most importantly, the VA began processing the backlog of Category B and C veterans with immediate priority. Lives that had been dismissed as administrative complexity were finally recognized as the heroes they had always been. Marcus King's sister, Denise, received a call from the VA offering comprehensive mental health services for other family members affected by veteran suicide. It was too late for Marcus, but his story had ensured that other families wouldn't face the same abandonment. In the end, Jasmine Crockett had done more than expose a failed policy. She had reminded America that behind every statistic was a story, behind every case file was a human being, and behind every folded flag was a hero who deserved better than being reduced to a budget calculation. The fight for veteran justice wasn't over. It might never be over. But that day in the committee chamber, surrounded by the symbols of service and sacrifice, truth had finally found its voice, and America had been forced to listen. The hearing ended at 4:23 p.m., but the real story was just beginning. As JD Vance's security detail escorted him through the marble corridors of the Capitol building, his communications director, Sarah Chen, was already fielding calls from CNN, Fox News, and every major network. The footage was everywhere, and the damage control playbook she'd perfected over years of political crises was utterly useless against this. "Sir," she whispered urgently as they walked, "we need to get ahead of this narrative. The optics are—" "The optics?" Vance stopped abruptly, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Sarah, did you hear what just happened in there? This isn't about optics anymore." For the first time in her career, Sarah Chen had no response, because he was right. This wasn't a scandal that could be spun or a controversy that could be buried in the news cycle. This was something entirely different. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office, staring at her phone as notifications flooded the screen. Justice for Marcus was trending #1 worldwide. Operation Triage Red was climbing fast. Her Twitter mentions were exploding with messages from veterans, families, and ordinary Americans who had watched the hearing live. But one message stood out. It was from Denise King, Marcus's sister. "Congresswoman Crockett, I watched today." Marcus would be proud. His voice finally mattered. "Thank you for making sure he wasn't forgotten." Jasmine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was bigger than one hearing, bigger than one policy, bigger than one corrupt official. This was about rebuilding trust between America and the people who had bled for it. Her chief of staff, David Rodriguez, knocked softly before entering. "Jasmine, the phones haven't stopped ringing. We've got interview requests from every major outlet, speaking invitations from veteran organizations across the country, and—" He paused, checking his notes. "3 different movie studios want to option your story." "David," Jasmine said quietly, "set up meetings with the veteran organizations. Decline everything else. This isn't about me." 3 floors below, in the Capitol Basement's media center, chaos reigned. Reporters who had expected a routine committee hearing found themselves scrambling to process one of the most explosive political moments in recent memory. The video footage was being analyzed frame by frame, the audio recordings verified by multiple sources, and the implications explored by constitutional scholars and military experts. CNN's political director, Maria Santos, stood in front of a wall of monitors showing social media feeds from around the world. "I've covered politics for 20 years, she told her production team, "and I've never seen anything like this. The raw emotion, the documented evidence, the complete destruction of a sitting vice president's credibility, this is historically unprecedented." On Twitter, the hashtag #BlackVets are a priority was gaining momentum as veterans shared their own stories of delayed care, denied claims, and bureaucratic nightmares. The personal testimonies were devastating. "Waited 8 months for PTSD treatment, told I wasn't priority. Finally got help when I threatened suicide. The system is broken." At Vet Mike, 82nd. "My husband served 3 tours. VA denied his TBI claim twice. He's been waiting 2 years for an appeal hearing." Justice for Marcus at Army Wife Strong. Category B veteran here. "Jasmine Crockett spoke for all of us today. First time I felt heard in years." At Marine Corps Vet. But the backlash was swift and predictable. Conservative media outlets immediately began attacking Jasmine's motives, questioning the authenticity of the recordings, and suggesting the entire hearing was a partisan hit job. Fox News ran a segment titled, "Is Jasmine Crockett using dead veterans for political gain?" However, something unexpected happened. Veteran organizations that typically stayed out of partisan politics began issuing statements supporting Jasmine's revelations. The American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and Iraq and Afghanistan. Veterans of America all called for immediate investigations into Operation Triage Red. Most surprising was the statement from General Patricia Williams, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a registered Republican. "Politics aside, the evidence presented today demands serious investigation. Our veterans deserve better than what these documents suggest they have been receiving. Congresswoman Crockett has done a service to every American who has ever worn the uniform." Back in his private office, JD Vance sat behind his desk, staring at the classified memo that had started this nightmare. His deputy chief of staff, Michael Torres, paced nervously by the window. "Sir, we need to consider damage control options. Maybe we can frame this as a rogue bureaucrat misimplementing your directives, or suggest that the program was sabotaged by political opponents." Vance looked up, his eyes hollow. "Michael, stop. Just stop." "Sir? Do you have any idea what we've done?" Vance's voice was barely audible. "I signed orders that killed American heroes, not enemy combatants, not foreign terrorists, our own people, veterans who trusted us to take care of them." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the program was designed to optimize resource allocation. It was designed to let minorities die quietly so we wouldn't have to spend money on them." Vance exploded, slamming his hand on the desk. "And I signed off on it because some consultant told me it would save money and improve optics." The room fell silent. Outside, D.C. traffic hummed through the bulletproof windows, but inside, the weight of moral reckoning pressed down like a physical force. Meanwhile, the story was evolving in real time. Investigative journalists were already tracking down other veterans affected by Operation Triage Red. The Washington Post had assembled a team of reporters to examine VA records dating back 18 months. The New York Times was analyzing the racial disparities in veteran care denials. CNN was preparing a prime-time special on systematic discrimination in government agencies. But the most powerful voices weren't coming from news organizations. They were coming from ordinary Americans who had been directly affected by these policies. Dr. Angela Foster, a psychiatrist who worked with veteran mental health cases, posted a video that went viral within hours. "I've been treating veterans for 15 years. Over the past 2 years, I've seen a dramatic increase in delayed care authorizations, especially for veterans of color. I thought it was just bureaucratic inefficiency. Now I understand it was intentional policy. This is medical apartheid, and it's happening in America in 2025. The video was shared over 2 million times in its first day online. In Detroit, Marcus King's neighborhood began organizing. His sister Denise, who had never been involved in politics, found herself speaking at community meetings about veteran care. Local churches started memorial services for veterans who had died waiting for treatment. The house where Marcus had lived became an unofficial shrine, with flowers, flags, and photos left by neighbors who had never known his story until now. Marcus was quiet, his neighbor Mrs. Thompson told a local news crew. But he always helped carry groceries for the elderly folks on the block. He shoveled snow for free. He was a good boy who needed help, and his own government turned its back on him. The political implications were seismic. By the end of the week, 17 Republican senators had called for JD Vance's resignation. Democratic leaders were preparing articles of impeachment. Independent voters, according to early polling, were abandoning the administration in droves. But President Trump's response was characteristically defiant. At a rally in Florida, he dismissed the entire scandal as fake news from the radical left and claimed Vance was being persecuted for making tough decisions. However, even his most loyal supporters seemed uncomfortable with defending policies that resulted in veteran deaths. The administrative fallout was equally dramatic. 3 VA administrators were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The Justice Department announced a criminal inquiry into potential civil rights violations. The FBI began examining the implementation of Operation Triage Red for evidence of systematic discrimination. Most significantly, Congress moved with unusual bipartisan speed to address the crisis. Within 72 hours of Jasmine's hearing, emergency legislation was introduced to immediately suspend all Category B and C classifications, provide emergency mental health services to any veteran requesting them, establish an independent commission to review every denied claim since 2023, create a veteran advocate position in each VA facility to prevent future discrimination. The bill passed the House 387-34 and the Senate 78-15. Even politicians who had previously supported cutting veteran benefits found themselves unable to vote against emergency care for heroes. International reaction was swift and embarrassing for the administration. Allied nations began questioning America's commitment to its own military personnel. NATO allies privately expressed concerns about the reliability of an administration that would abandon its own veterans for political gain. But perhaps the most powerful response came from an unexpected source: active duty military personnel. While bound by regulations preventing political statements, thousands of service members began sharing the hashtag #WeRememberMarcus without comment, creating a silent but powerful show of solidarity with veterans who had been failed by the system. Jasmine Crockett found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't intended to create. Speaking invitations poured in from across the country. Veterans organizations wanted her as their keynote speaker. Civil rights groups sought her endorsement. Political commentators speculated about her potential presidential ambitions. But she remained focused on the work itself. In the weeks following the hearing, she visited VA facilities in 12 states, meeting with veterans who had been affected by discriminatory policies. She listened to stories of delayed care, denied claims, and bureaucratic nightmares that had driven heroes to desperation. In Birmingham, she met Robert Jackson, a Vietnam veteran who had been waiting 3 years for disability benefits. "I thought the country had forgotten us," he told her. "After watching you stand up to Vance, I have hope again." In Phoenix, she consoled Maria Gonzalez, whose son had committed suicide after being denied mental health treatment. "Thank you for making sure Antonio's death wasn't meaningless," Maria whispered through tears. In Cleveland, she spoke with David Kim, a Korean War veteran who had been reclassified from Priority 1 to Category B after questioning his delayed treatment. "You gave voice to something we all knew but couldn't prove," he said. Each story added weight to her conviction that this wasn't about politics or personal advancement. This was about fundamental justice and the sacred covenant between America and its warriors. The investigation expanded rapidly. Congressional subpoenas uncovered additional recordings of JD Vance discussing veteran care in explicitly racial terms. Internal emails revealed that Operation Triage Red had been specifically designed to reduce costs by targeting veterans deemed politically invisible. Whistleblowers came forward with evidence of deliberate delays in minority veteran care dating back years. Most damaging was the discovery of a private consulting firm that had been paid $3.2 million to design optimization algorithms for veteran care. The algorithms, it turned out, included racial and economic factors in determining care priority. Veterans from zip codes with higher minority populations were automatically flagged for delayed treatment. The consulting firm's internal documents, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, revealed the shocking cynicism behind the policy. Minority veterans are statistically less likely to pursue political remedies for delayed care, making them ideal candidates for resource reallocation. The political cost of veteran dissatisfaction is minimal when concentrated in communities with limited electoral influence. When these documents became public, even conservative commentators who had initially defended Vance began calling for accountability. The moral outrage transcended partisan lines because the evidence was undeniable and the implications were devastating. JD Vance's approval ratings collapsed from 61% to 23% in just 2 weeks. Members of his own party began publicly distancing themselves from his administration. The political calculation that had driven Operation Triage Red, that veteran suffering would remain politically invisible, had spectacularly backfired. But the real victory wasn't political. It was personal and immediate. Veterans who had been waiting months or years for care suddenly found themselves receiving callbacks from VA administrators. Mental health appointments that had been pending were suddenly available. Disability claims that had been stalled were expedited for review. The change wasn't just procedural, it was cultural. VA employees who had implemented discriminatory policies under bureaucratic pressure began speaking out about the moral injury they had suffered from denying care to heroes. Many requested transfers to patient advocacy roles, determined to prevent future systemic abuse. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a VA psychologist in Texas, described the transformation. For 2 years, I was forced to delay treatment for veterans who desperately needed help. I was told it was resource management, but I knew it was wrong. After Congresswoman Crockett's hearing, everything changed. We're actually able to help people again. It feels like practicing medicine instead of practicing discrimination. The ripple effects extended far beyond veteran care. Other government agencies began reviewing their own policies for evidence of systematic bias. The Department of Education examined racial disparities in student aid processing. The Social Security Administration investigated delays in disability determinations. The Department of Justice announced a comprehensive review of civil rights enforcement across all federal agencies. Jasmine Crockett had exposed more than one corrupt policy. She had revealed the moral bankruptcy of treating any American citizen as disposable for political convenience. The question now was whether America would learn from this moment or simply move on to the next crisis. As she sat in her office late one evening, reviewing letters from veterans and their families, Jasmine reflected on the unexpected power of speaking truth in a city built on political calculation. The folded flag on her desk, Marcus King's flag, had become a symbol not just of sacrifice, but of accountability. Her phone buzzed with a text from Denise King. Marcus's best friend from the service called me today. He's finally getting the mental health treatment he's been waiting for. Marcus would be happy knowing his story helped save someone else. That message captured everything Jasmine had hoped to achieve. Not political theater or viral moments, but real change in real lives. The work of justice was never finished, but sometimes, just sometimes, truth could cut through the noise and remind America of its better angels. The investigation into Operation Triage Red would continue for months. JD Vance's political career was effectively over. The systematic discrimination that had killed Marcus King and others would be dismantled and rebuilt with transparency and accountability. But the most important victory was the simplest one. America's veterans would no longer be treated as disposable. They would be honored, cared for, and remembered as the heroes they had always been. In a city where political scandals came and went like weather patterns, Jasmine Crockett had achieved something rare and precious, lasting change built on moral courage and documented truth. The folded flags on her desk represented not just the dead, but the living. All the veterans who would receive better care because someone had finally been willing to speak for them. The work continued as it always must, but America was a little more just than it had been before. And sometimes, that's how democracy heals itself. One truth at a time, one hero at a time, one voice willing to speak for those who have been silenced. 6 months later, JD Vance faced his last day in office. The impeachment proceedings had concluded with his resignation, but the moral weight of his actions continued to follow him. As he cleared out his desk, he found himself staring at a framed photo from his military days. Young, idealistic, believing in service above self. The irony wasn't lost on him. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. His secretary announced that Congresswoman Crockett was requesting a private meeting. Vance hesitated, then nodded. "Send her in." Jasmine entered alone, carrying a single manila folder. No cameras, no staff, no witnesses, just two people who had changed American history in that committee room. "Mr. Vice President," she said formally. "Just JD now," he replied quietly. "What can I do for you?" Jasmine placed the folder on his desk. Inside was a photograph of Marcus King in his dress uniform, smiling proudly at his graduation from basic training. "His sister wanted you to have this," Jasmine said. She said Marcus believed in redemption. Even after everything, she hopes you'll find a way to honor his memory. Vance stared at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," Jasmine agreed, "but Marcus's story isn't about what you deserve. It's about what every veteran deserves, and that's a system that honors their service instead of abandoning them." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The Veteran Care Reform Bill passed this morning. Unanimous in both chambers. Every veteran who was denied care under your program will receive immediate treatment. Marcus's death won't be meaningless." As the door closed behind her, JD Vance sat alone with Marcus King's photograph, finally understanding the true cost of treating heroes like statistics. Outside his window, Washington continued its endless political dance, but inside that office, accountability had finally arrived. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came quietly, not with cameras or crowds, but with the simple recognition that every life matters, every service deserves honor, and every wrong demands to be made right. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the veterans in your own community, don't let this moment fade. This isn't just about one hearing or one policy. It's about how we treat the people who sacrifice everything for our freedom. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're going to keep following this story and others like it. We're going to keep asking the hard questions that Washington doesn't want to answer. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, because the more people who understand what's really happening, the harder it becomes for politicians to hide behind bureaucracy and talking points. And if you're a veteran watching this, or if you love someone who served, remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and there are people fighting for you every single day. Justice isn't just about the courtroom. It's about speaking truth to power, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. This is just the beginning. Stay with us, because the fight for accountability is far from over.